Right, hello, welcome to Sisyphus Complex Solution. This is episode 180 and it's called An English Heaven. A couple of differences this week as Sunday, or this coming Sunday, is Remembrance Day, and hence the title of the episode. And the reason why there's what I call like the quote page, and that where recently I've been having like biblical quotes. This time I had a poem in the opening, and there's going to be some more about that at the end of the episode, so stick around for that. It'll be a slightly different ending to normal. Obviously it's pertinent this year because now I am in the process of auditing the MOD, and in this particular episode I'll be covering two organisations, entities within the MOD audit. So, getting started. Right, we've got the Advisory Committee on Conscientious Objectors. Obviously you can see there's no numbers for me to be able to report here other than to say that it's supposed to have 6 members on this committee, and they are supposed to meet every 3 years. I'm kind of assuming that everybody understands what a conscientious objector is, but this is the stage of that particular scenario where the attempts, if somebody's attempted to remove themselves from the military service via other means have failed, it then shifts into this particular set of circumstances. The last report that they have available is from 2013, and so it seems like that meeting every 3 years has suddenly become 12 and counting. In general, there isn't really much else to say here, but I want to consider a little bit the fact that we've got certain known conflicts which we could give some consideration to, and that during just this 12-year period when they haven't actually convened in any form. And so that would account for Afghanistan, Somalia, Iraq, Syria and Yemen. And for anybody that's out there that says that no, we didn't have any involvement in those locations, yes we did. I suppose the question that comes to mind really is, how likely is it that nobody amongst the military in those operations thought, what the actual fuck am I doing here? That does seem a little bit unlikely. But I mean, I can only possibly assume then that the routes for being able to get out of deployment are easier than they used to be, and don't necessarily need to resort to being a conscientious objector. There are historical claims about this kind of objection, but essentially we are talking about something that came into the form that we know it, or this form of protest, I suppose, and that in the First World War. Obviously there can be arguments about why the First World War and indeed the Second Wars were fought. I'm not going down that particular deep dive on this occasion. So what's more important to my mind really is a system that I'd consider to be appropriate for the kind of modern warfare, because despite everybody being focused on the likes of Iraq and how that was an illegal war back in 2003, and it wasn't illegal. I mean, it was based off of absolute lies. But even before that, you had the bombing of the Serbs in 1999, which was also at the moment when NATO lied to everybody. But particularly you have to think about how this affects the guys that have to actually go out into these locations and perform these actions off of the back of lies. And the thing is that NATO's reason for existing was that it's supposed to be a defensive alignment. And from that moment in 1999, I have mentioned this before, but it became obvious that the intention had always been not to be defensive, it was very much about being an offensive force. So in many ways, essentially, we're sort of now much more aware, and we can gain information much more quickly that exposes how governments are lying to justify wars. And on that basis alone, I think it makes it very difficult for the need to have this kind of conscientious objection system in place anymore. I'm sure there'll be people that will turn around and sort of try to find ways to go, oh, mental health or something like that. But there definitely should be a way for these people to turn around and say, no, I'm not going out somewhere just because you want me to go out there. And it's all based off of your lies. I am not going to go and start wars based on your lies. Quite telling that this week, or this past week, and that one of the biggest liars of them all from the US, that Dick Cheney, piece of shit that he was, he's finally gone to meet his underground maker. Certain people in the UK deserve that as well. Blair, Campbell. But because we do have this kind of serious problem around the fact that modern warfare is very much a case of not justifying itself and being a situation where people are being deliberately lied to, and so therefore having our boys putting their lives in danger off of the back of some arsehole lying as they sit millions of miles away smirking about it. I think this is something that we could look towards abolishing, really. Get this, as soon as they're not meeting anyway, and that, just get it off the books, because literally in that it's not our boys that are the ones that need to justify themselves. It does become a much deeper conversation and consideration, but I think that kind of thing, and that would be a bit wiser to leave towards the end of when I've done the audit of the MOD, because there are proper considerations as to appropriate use of the military anyway. So, get that one out of the way. And now we moved into the Armed Forces Pay Review Body. And so keep in mind again that this is not an office, it's a body, which is similar to a committee. And so the numbers for the benchmark year of 2019 to 2020 are taxpayer burden of over 104k, average fees, not salaries, this is not a full-time role, of 9,775. Hold your horses on that one, because we're not talking about salary, it's fees. And then that means that you end up with a cost of employment of 75%, whereby the remaining operational costs are based on the claimed expenses for each of the members. For the 5 years under the Conservatives, the standout year would be 2020 to 2021, and the drop that took place. Obviously, that was because nobody was really doing anything, naturally, because they were too busy scamming the country with a fake virus. But they were getting some pay regardless, just obviously not as much as normal. 2021 and 2022, clearly still having them predominantly working from home due to the limited expenses, and yes, we were still in various stages of having the country being destroyed at that point. Now, there's a bit of an up and down in terms of the numbers being sort of 8, 9 members, and then once at 10 people being involved. And the peak average high pay was the benchmark period. And keep in mind again, these are advisory roles. And whilst the time spent is not stated, which it should be, I know full well that most of this wouldn't fill a week. Normally with these kinds of numbers, you're talking about somebody that has potentially puts the number of hours to warrant a day in many of the instances. You maybe have one or two of them that spend up to around a week on something like this, but certainly not all of them. So this particular basis gives some interest again as to the fact that we can include the numbers for the year under Labour. So what we can see is the second highest overall cost from these 6 years, but a very distinct and notable increase in these average fees. The last two episodes included numbers for what would constitute what we could call sort of like regular staff, and the average salary had decreased. But when you work in this kind of Fabian socialist favour, well, they get more than the plebs, obviously. Quite the long-term, the long-known results of how socialism actually works is tending to prove accurate once again. But I want to delve into it a little bit more. Dealing with the about us scenario first, and the little time they spend on being the ones that will tell our boys what they can get paid. They are also involved in the recruitment and qualification side of things, and then that obviously will help us to have a bit of an understanding as to where all of the anti-white male ideology feeds into the system. Again, I'll demonstrate that a bit later on. It doesn't surprise me then really that to find out that from 2022 this committee included somebody called Gillian Fairfield that I've got highlighted there. I covered this woman in episode 135, which the episode was named specifically for her and why I called it Failing Upwards. This career-long failure also heads up as the chairman of the Disclosure and Barring Service, for which she is completely unqualified. And she also sits within the IOPC, which is the Independent Office for Police Conduct, for which she is also completely unqualified. Another piece of interesting information about her that I noticed that she hasn't mentioned in her register of interest, which I'll be showing shortly. She's also one of the people that sits on the Infected Blood Compensation Authority. When you see scum like pederast rapists, or attempted rapists, should we say, being paid to leave the country and being given the equivalent of a year's salary to do so, year's salary in the shithole that they've been sent back to. Keep in mind that this infected blood scandal was about people being intentionally infected with AIDS in the 70s and 80s, and they still haven't been compensated properly. Obviously that's not entirely down to this particular woman. She wasn't there in the 70s and 80s. But for her to skip putting that in her information is a little bit informative, shall we say. So here's where we can start to understand the problem really when we're dealing with these kinds of organisations as per usual. So let's have a bit of a look into this body. This is the current register of interests for each of the current members, and I've highlighted two of them in terms of the other declarations side of things. because they're the only two people that have got any military experience at all. And even one of them, I would say, is not that big of a deal, to be perfectly frank. Obviously, with such a minimum level of work, it's not a surprise that they have other positions. But you do have to understand how many of these positions are held by the same people. And what I mean by that is best really exemplified again by that Gillian Fairfield, because of how many of these kinds of boards, bodies and committees that she, and then others as well, sit on. You know, it's that small club, and infected across many different parts of government, and you can certainly understand and determine why it is that certain kinds of ideology spreads the way that it does. Now, I do also notice within these register of interests and that, because, you know, this is further indication of the typical kind of socialist system, there's an awful lot of the socialist whinge bags that like to whine about people with second homes and landlords, that type of thing. And you'll be able to notice that 5 out of these 8 people own more than one home. Obviously, it doesn't matter when they do it. If it's one of their own, it's not a problem. And then you'll have people like Gillian, just consistently in every bad aspect of this, that's got a property abroad as well. You know, no problem if it's them. But more indicative than this is the money these members have been getting for this role, specifically over the period that I'm reporting on. And so don't worry about the end not being quite fully laid out at this particular stage. There's a reason. Now, we can note at the top of this particular chart of all of the people that have been involved in this at various stages. So obviously where you have the grey blank space, they weren't actually sitting on this committee. But the guy at the top, this guy called Peter Madison, we've got the amount of money that he was paid in the first period that I've looked at, and then there's 3 periods comparative after that. And you can notice that his money went down each year. Okay. So you might look at this and think that from the baseline numbers of 2019 to 2020, it's kind of a mixed picture of money going up and down. So I suppose the simplest way of making a comparison really is, how much did they get at the start of their being a part of this committee from that benchline period, and how much were they getting at the end of it? And that will give us a clearer perspective as to what the direction of travel was. There is a standout, isn't there? But those who'd held position up to the latest point of 2022 to 23, which is only really 2 people at that point, we can see that their pay, these fees, have been reducing. But then there's a very distinct and marked difference between those people and then those people that replace them. Whereby I do need to point out that John Westbrook in the 2019 to 2020 period has had the highest take of everybody within this entire field of £18,713.23 for what would probably be either one day or at best 1 week's worth of work. But then he didn't appear afterwards, so that was the last you'll see of, that was the last we saw of him. Now, Gillian Fairfield came in, I say, in this 2022 period, and yes, granted, she came in at a low base of £600, but you can't help but raise an eyebrow at the fact that in that brief period that she's been there, just a couple of years after, you've got a 2,360.37% rise in the space of those 2 subsequent years. And the fact that she's now the highest paid of the existing members. Now, her total is the 4th highest annual payment over the entirety of this 6 years that is included here. But the point I'm making is that we should really be looking at this from the perspective of the people who are deciding what our boys, if indeed our boys are allowed to enter into the military, kind of a separate point but important to put in there, how much our boys are going to be paid to put their lives at risk, decided by people like this. And also remember, this is in the likes of this Gillian Fairfield, this is someone taking taxpayer money from a range of these kinds of roles. So yeah, it's no wonder we've got a nice little home abroad. But just understand the latest bunch, particularly since 2022 to 2023, up to the latest reports, and the size of the pay rises that they can get. The reason why it's important to ingrain that in your mind for a moment is because let's have a look and see what they recommended for our boys, shall we? From their last report, and it determined that from April of 2025, so again during the period of Labour, the summation, there are a few other details about different parts within the military, but predominantly across the board what we're talking about here is this recommendation that the pay increased by 4.5%. Not quite the 2,000 odd percent, is it? Now, obviously I'm going to take this with a little bit of a pinch of salt and that, because I'll see if that's true when I do start to look into the actual salaries, because so far, and that what I'm seeing from the couple of other organisations that I've looked at, that it's just not, that's not the way that it's happening in those offices, so we'll see. But like I say, if you just keep in mind that the lowest change overall from that particular group that makes this decision was a guy called David Billingham, where his overall increase was 9.84%. And then also keep in mind that that was kind of reined in a little bit, and that because his increase between 2024 and 2025 was 31.71%. The additional perspective then is to see if this actually is a rise in real terms when considering inflation. And as you can see from the chart there, currently standing at 4.1%, and it has been since this award was provided, apparently, and we can get a little bit further evidence of that. This is the period of Labour, and yes, it has been 4.1% throughout the entire duration. And so that's not really done, a 4.5% hasn't really done them much of a favour then, has it? So in real terms and that, you're looking at a 0.4% rise. Dear. So yeah, it's not really that big of a favour to the boys, is it? These people that sit on the sidelines, with most of them having absolutely no clue what they're doing, no relevance to the military whatsoever, and including people that have literally been an absolute failure wherever they've been. But that's how socialism works, folks. That's the way it's done. This is the thing, really, and that when you've got these idiots out there that are screaming their heads off about the imaginary capitalism system, and literally everything that they cry about is the reality of socialism, and they'll never get it. They're too stupid. But what can you do? Get rid. That's what you can do. So, other areas of issue that I have that stem from organisations like this. Here's where you get the diversity on full display, the ideology on full display, and the DIE perspective. Absolutely farcical that anything remotely like this is a part of the military. I mean, this is where you know that the seniors in the military are being pushed on the basis of socialist graph. It's got nothing to do with ability, readiness, being equipped, a force to be reckoned with. It's all about some stupid fucking graph and how many non-white men have they got. We need more non-white men for me graph. Absolute stupidity of the highest order. And what it has meant for quite a period of time is that the outflow is not being met by the intake. Now I can see from these numbers, which I'm dubious about at best, I definitely suspect that you're not getting more diversity, and I dare say that the destruction of the economy is leaving a lot of our lads with not a great deal of choice, and so there is that uptick on the intake side, because again that's in line with how this particular form of socialism works, where it's got its command and control system, the command and control economy in place, and then that starts shifting things towards military production, and then that leads to a lot of the lads having not really much choice but to either enter into the military or to be producing for the military, because these types of economies destroy everything else, because that's all they can think to do. It's literally replication. I have to keep repeating this. It is replication of a 1930s socialist German model being recreated, because they literally have no other ideas. It's always the same shit with these people. We can't do anything. Socialism doesn't work. I know, let's start a war to hide shit. That's basically it. So for the younger lads, realistically, in that, I mean, operating completely outside of the system makes much more sense than being cannon fodder for the next fake war that they're going to lie about. And so, the fact that we've got something like around about 25% of the population where they're not in any kind of economic activity at all, at least as far as what the government is able to deduce. And I would suggest that you're looking at something like around about 20% of them are operating outside of the system. until we've got some kind of a sense of nation worthy of the lads being able to go in and have some kind of pride in their nation and feeling that if a sacrifice is required, then they would be prepared to do that. Until we have the nation back in that kind of level of legitimacy, I couldn't honestly say that any of our lads should take this particular path. If they can avoid it, they should, because of the way that they're being treated and the way that they're being lied to and the fact that they will be discarded in ways that probably do come on par with some of the kind of over-the-wall situations that you saw in World War One. The fact that we had one of our few remaining soldiers that's in the news at the moment because he said his sacrifice wasn't worth it. And the guys that he fought with, their sacrifice wasn't worth it because we don't have the freedoms that they fought for. That's a wise old boy there. And that's upset a lot of the wailing socialist lefties, because that's what they've created. So no, I don't have a recommendation for the young lads at the moment to be wasting their lives for these scumbags that are more interested in whether their graph shows that they've got the right amount of women in there and the right number of ethnics in there. Fuck off. Bloody Remembrance Sunday as well coming up. Incredible. Right, so this is the benchmark period and the state of the finances at the moment. 2 more down. 10 entities completed and still in a net positive position, but we've got at least 24 still to go. On to the policies then, and obviously yes, I would abolish both of these entities. The first one is easy because obviously if you've got something that hasn't been done, I've been doing anything for 12 years anyway, doesn't really matter. But in terms of this pay board, this is where the ideologues and idiots that cause the problem can and should be taken out. You've got ministers that are supposed to be in charge of departments for a reason, or you're supposed to anyway. So maybe they should get off their arse and take some responsibility for their own department. It's not about taking some idiot day trip and pondering for another day to see whether you're going to get a 2,000% pay rise while they just about sneak above inflation. It's about wider affordability and priority. Priority being defence of the nation. Not all nations, the nation. It's about being grown up and taking responsibility and being accountable for your decisions. And if you can't do that, if you can't handle being responsible for our boys, the ones that would be on the front line that take the sacrifice, if you're not able to look them in the eye and tell them what their sacrifice might be for and what you intend to do to make everything possible sure that they don't have to actually sacrifice, that they would be able to defend the nation with some level of bloody honour. If you can't do that, then you should never be anywhere near them. This military is fast going the same way as the police. And it's all because you've got a few socialist retards. I mean, this level of... If the military does go full on like the police are now, this is a level of treachery that will be unprecedented. For the UK at least. But we know they'll do it. These people are too fucking thick, and they will do that. They would be prepared to do that. And the only way that you avoid that is if we and our boys stand up and go, I don't fucking think so. Not a chance in hell. You can stick your socialist ideology up your ass. You want to live in one of those countries? Fuck off. Go to China. Go to Brazil. Along with Willy Boy the German. Go with those people. Get out. Because it doesn't belong here. Disgraceful. Right, the end of the video this week is going to be, like I say, it's going to be a bit different to normal. So I do sort of say, you know, take a couple of minutes extra to watch the end here. Because it's going to be a bit of a musical ending. And it's from a small channel that I've come across on YouTube called Poetic Vistas. I'm assuming it's only a fairly recent YouTube channel. It's only got 2 followers. And I dare say it's also sort of like AI created or something like that, but it doesn't matter. I mean, I thought it was pretty good, and it's a musical rendition of the Rupert Brooks poem, The Soldier. So there's a link in the description for it as well. So, you know, go and give some support for that. But I certainly think that it's appropriate to end this episode on the fact that this Sunday is Remembrance Sunday, and that hopefully people will, instead of just regurgitating the words lest we forget, finally start to remember. That's more important. Never mind the forgetting part, you need to remember. Understand what people have done for this country, and you don't just give it away to these lunatics. So on that note, I'll leave the video, the music video, to say all it needs to say. Bye bye.
If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. There shall be in that rich earth a richer dust concealed, a dust whom England bore, shaped, made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam. A body of England's breathing English air, washed by the rivers, blessed by sons of home. And think this heart all evil shed away, a pulse in the eternal mind, no less. Give somewhere back the thoughts by England given, her sights and sounds, dreams happy as her day, and laughter learned to friends, and gentleness heart's at peace under an English heaven.